Building something from nothing is terrifying. I've been completely obsessed with this project, one that's consumed all my knowledge, focus and energy. For weeks, even months, I've been tackling a challenge I've avoided for most of my career. Making a comic. In all my years as an artist, whether as a student, working in a studio or going solo, I did everything I could to avoid this ultimate challenge. Something about it felt so daunting that I never seriously committed beyond a few pages or panels. Even though I grew up reading Hellboy comics and occasionally flipping through graphic novels, the idea of making my own never really crossed my mind. While studying to become an artist and designer, I quickly realized my brain just isn't wired for pre-planning long stories or unfolding them across multiple panels or pages. The sheer number of skills needed, perspective, composition, lighting and character design felt like a massive artistic beast, one I couldn't see myself taking on all at once. Fast forward to me at 32, having a few drinks at a random bar in Paris with my buddy Stefan. That's when we made a call. Let's take matters into our own hands. Time to face our fears, start a publishing company and dive headfirst into the chaos by making a collaborative comic project. When you're jumping into a project like this for the first time, there's no way you're getting everything right. Before even thinking about my first comic, I had to deal with the mountains of bureaucracy and administrative work that comes with starting a company. And if you ever try to do that in Germany, you know it's a nightmare. It's the kind of thing that makes you want to quit before you even took your first step. Endless paperwork, endless agencies, things to keep track of, and so many people you have to answer to. But after pushing through that Kafkaesque labyrinth, we finally took a breather and figured out the name and logo for our company. Gooey Goose! With that out of the way, the real fun began. Time to brainstorm. We threw around a ton of ideas. Tarot deck, calendar, poster series, or maybe comics? Comics felt right, but what would the comic even be about? And could we really handle the insane amount of work that comes with it? Neither of us had much experience with comics, and coming up with a solid concept was a whole other level of struggle. After hours of scribbling and tossing around ideas, we landed on something that would make things way easier. Why not invite our friends, idols, and most importantly you, the community that's been backing us for so long to be part of this project. That's how our first project, Mirrored Dreams, started to take shape. And honestly, this approach gave us all we need to take on whatever was coming next. So we reached out to a bunch of super talented artists, and slowly but surely our lineup came together. Each person bringing their own style and flair. But now we needed stories. This is where you came in. We asked you for your most memorable dreams and nightmares. And in response, it was overwhelming, in the best possible way. The stories that came in were insane, so beautifully written and detailed, reading through them immediately sparked ideas for days. Still, I won't lie, I had my doubts. My experience with comics was pretty limited, and I had no idea if I was even up to the challenge. But I knew once I found the perfect story in the submissions, things would fall into place. I went down a rabbit hole. At first, I scratched the surface of what makes a comic a comic. I started by creating mood boards, but most of what I found looked something like this. Sure, these are solid examples, but they weren't the kind of work I wanted to create. I kept digging, researching comics that break the mold, to looking at artworks that use parts of comics without actually being comics, rereading those guidebooks on composition and lighting. Then I remembered an old Daredevil comic from Frank Miller and Bill Sienkiewicz that seemed to fit the direction I want to go. I rewatched my favorite movie, Spider-Verse, paying attention to how they used comic elements in an animation. It was cool to look at, but it didn't really solve the bigger problem. I'm afraid of making comics. Days went by and my pile of inspiration just sat there. Books, notes, sketches, my MacBook, all looking back at me. And I knew there was only one way to fix this. Grab my iPad, grab my pen and dive into the process. I had to start creating and figure it out as I went. First step. I had to pick a story. Seems simple enough, right? But that alone was enough to spark the fire I needed. I scrolled through the huge pile of submissions and one particular dream by Cappy Wood grabbed me. I remember being in a field of flowers. The flowers were very beautiful. The light was bright, but the sun was dark and the day was beautiful. I also remember a creature that had a skull for a head and wore a black suit. He was quite tall, but friendly. We were sitting at a table, eating cakes and drinking tea. He looked a lot like Alice in Wonderland. But it was a very good and pleasant dream. This dream was inspiring. It had just the right amount of surreal imagery and strange elements I love working with in my illustrations. Step 2. Time to draw. I made some rough sketches, plotted out the pacing of the story over several pages, and began experimenting with the boundaries of what defines a comic. I struggled with staying inside the frames, so I played with the idea of letting the dreamlike quality of the story also influence how the comic was structured. In my mind, dreams are usually clear in the center, while everything around the edges bends and distorts reality. So I used frames to give a rough structure to the flow of the story, but I broke them apart in places to emphasize the dreamlike feel. Step 3. Now that I had a plan, I went and shot a ton of reference images of myself. Initially, I didn't plan on including my own likeness in the comic, but as I got deeper into the story, I started to feel connected to it in a way I didn't expect. Maybe that's why I picked that particular dream without even thinking too much about it in the beginning. Step 4. Cleaning up the mess that I call a sketch. My sketches aren't the neatest, they're just messy enough to help me find my way through an artwork. Some artists like to spend hours on sketches, but I tend to skip that and jump straight into the line art. To give it some extra flair, I skewed and distorted my references to amplify that peripheral vision effect. Everything needed to look a bit out of shape, just like how visuals in a dream often feel. One thing that really challenged me though was pacing. I knew from previous projects that pacing wasn't exactly my strength, and long format work tends to get chaotic for me. Sometimes I accidentally spoil a punchline halfway through and ruin the suspense for the big finale. So I went back to my sketches multiple times to make sure the flow was linear. The protagonist should start out anxious and worried, but over the course of the pages that feeling should shift to calm and happiness. I was trying to find that sweet spot between what works in comics and my own interpretation of it. Being happy with where the artwork was going, but also wanting to scrap it and start over became part of my routine. Reiterating the composition, revisiting my references, reworking the line art, it all became a cycle. After countless hours trying to meet my own expectations, I finally realized I was done. I got so lost in the details that I didn't even notice when I reached the point where I usually tell myself, alrighty, done. With the line art and shading down, the essence of the comic, I could finally start coloring it. And luckily, the concept of Mirror Dreams was to only use black, white and red. That sped up things a lot, and I actually got to enjoy the final stages of wrapping this comic up. And before I knew it, I had forgotten all about the initial fear of creating a comic. In the end, creating a comic, it's not that different from any other art form I tried in the past. It mainly utilizes aspects of art in a different and for me unusual way that made it so intimidating in the beginning. You're still using the same core elements, but it's how you mix them together that makes it feel like uncharted terrain. But like anything else, you don't always know where you're going until you've already started walking that path. Now, with 6 pages of comic finished, I was ready to drop it into the layout next to all the other amazing contributions from the artists in our book. I was happy that I had tackled this beast and still managed to introduce my way of making art, a bit of my twist, my style, my voice as an artist. Is it the best comic out there? No. Does it have its flaws? Absolutely. But here's the thing, Jake Parker once said, finished, not perfect. And that's the mindset you need to embrace when you're facing something that seems impossible and scary. It's not about being perfect, it's about starting, seeing it through and letting go of the fear. Just take that first step, trust the process and go with the flow. Because the truth is, once you're in, you realize the hardest part was just starting. Taking on a project like this, it's no easy feat. It's not just about creating my first comic, it's about making sure these incredible artists get the space they deserve to showcase their work. And of course, bringing your dreams to life. It's more work than one can see, and honestly, it's not just about the art. There are so many moving pieces to this, and so many things I had no clue about. I had to learn a ton of stuff from scratch, things I never even thought about before. But this is why doing projects like this with your friends is great. Each person has their own experiences, and together you can share your knowledge and grow together and handle such projects way easier. If you're into a different kind of comic and you want to see the final artwork from all the amazing artists, just click the link in the description to see our Kickstarter campaign. We've got all kinds of ways you can support, and honestly, every bit of it means so much. And if you're watching this from the future, long after the campaign has ended, head over to our Instagram and see what we're up to next.